You know security is hard, so let's assume we're probably gonna get pwned by noon. But if we all start to get the basics right, we might not fully get pwned until tonight. We're recording, lights are on, stuff's happening. Well, welcome everybody who's trickling in. Thanks for joining this webinar. My name is Brian Johnson with 7 Minute Security and joined by my good pal, Joe Skeen, aka Ghost Hacks. You may have seen him on Twitter and in Slack answering questions and helping me figure out how to do my job every day, which I appreciate. Joe, just a couple things. People really liked part one of this series. And folks, if you're like, wait a minute, part one, where's that at? You can find that at 7ms.us/webinars. That has an archive of our past webinars and links to their respective YouTube videos and all the upcoming stuff as well. So this session will be recorded and will be on the YouTubes soon, probably in within a week or so. But you're welcome to check out all our past webinars as well. And I was just telling Joe before we started rolling that I believe in July-ish, August-ish, not totally confirmed, but there's somebody in our Slack channel that's very good at email setup stuff. The SPF, what's the other stuff? DMARC, DKIM,
yeah.
Mark, Kim, all those
all
acronyms.
Of the above, right.
Yeah, which I'm confused about, and I kind of understand conceptually, but not practically. And I was watching our buddy Nate explain this in kindergarten level to the way I could understand it, and I go, hey, would you want to do a webinar on this? I think a lot of people would it would help everything click for him. And he said, yeah. So we're just working out the logistics, but I think that'll be coming up. And then people in Slack today were saying, hey, we want an AD pen testing webinar. So please keep these ideas going, and Joe and I'll circle up, and we're always talking about this stuff because we love doing it and love sharing knowledge. So
for sure.
That's it, I think, because those are the things we always get asked. Is it going to be recorded? Where can I find the other webinars? And I think that's all announcement-y stuff that I have. So Joe, I wanted to, can I just tell folks that you and I did a cyber news podcast a few weeks ago, and I got great feedback on that too, and it all seemed to sound like this. Hey, Brian, when I saw this episode get posted, I thought, dear Lord, not another cyber news podcast. But then I listened to it, and it was like, hey, you guys actually made it practical and applicable to let me go to the office and do something about the news stories. You made it relevant to me. And so we've got more in the hopper. And in fact, I think we recorded a great one on the Verizon data breach report. But
and again, you're probably thinking, oh my God, Verizon data breach report. But no, I think we made it. The first time we made it great. The second time we recorded, as Brian's about to tell you, we're going to make it even better. So
yes, it was my bad. I had a clipping issue. And so my voice sounds like this, and Joe's is fine. And it was a technical snafu on my part. So that's going to be re-recorded. Look for it soon on 7ms.us.
Bam.
And that's all I have. So, Joe, I'll turn it over to you. Take it away and inject some burp knowledge into our craniums.
Keep me on track again today, Brian, because, I tend to talk a lot. So, as stated in the first one, I put my Twitter handle down there. Likes and follows and all that stuff are appreciated. But really, my Twitter handle, I joked last time about it. It's really just so I can like all of Brian's tweets. And, of course, shout out to PlexTrack, too, because you'll see that my pattern is like Brian's tweets, like PlexTrack tweets. It's hard to say, Brian. But anyways, and that's how you can reach Brian at 7MinSec and on Twitter. So with that being said, let's get going. Who is this for? So last time I didn't put in a kind of who is this for, but I figure I'll throw it in. So just getting started and watch part one. Have used Burp for things like Hack the Box but want to know more. Have used Burp free but want to know more about Burp Pro. Have used Burp and want to possibly pick up some new tips, or just bored and wanted to support 7 Minute Sec. So that's I thought maybe that could be the poll Brian is,
Yeah.
how many are here because you want to learn more, or you're just bored and you had an hour of free time. So
That's my mom right there, the last bullet.
exactly.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mom.
Thank you.
We always appreciate her. So what are we going to try and cover today? And I say try because there is quite a bit of content, and I want to stay on time as much as possible. Sometimes I go off on a tangent. I learned that from Brian. But still, the thing that amazed me about Brian is he can go 2 tangents deep and reel himself clear back in. I'll get 1 tangent deep, totally forget what I was even talking about. Every time on the podcast, I'm like, how did he do that? He went a tangent on a tangent and reeled himself back into the first tangent, always with a, oh, what was I talking about? And remembers. I don't know how he does it. Okay, so we're going to talk about hotkeys, match and replace, response modification, so unhide some hidden fields, remove some length restrictions. We're going to talk about request in browser, touch on repeater a little bit, touch on intruder a little bit, talk about macros and how you can use them, and then a couple of my favorite burp extensions. There's, I think, for another podcast, just burp extensions could probably be a webinar or a podcast again all of itself. So I'll talk about a couple of them, give some demos, and then maybe we'll do some more in a future one. Okay. So the first thing before, and you'll notice this wasn't on there because this was just released in the last, I think, 20.4, I think it was, which is pretty print, and I'll show that later. But I've seen a lot of people tweet about how much they either dislike or wish it could be turned off, and there is an option to turn off pretty print. So when you get like a JSON body back, it formats it all nice and pretty, and this option will turn it off. We'll show that in a bit.
Cool.
So the first thing we're going to talk about is hotkeys. Now, it's always been there as far as I know. I don't know how often people use the hotkeys, but one of the ways that I use the hotkeys is when I'm going through an app to just send stuff to repeater and intruder to look at later. So you remember in session 1, we had talked about sending stuff over to repeater as you're kind of going through the app and following that methodology. And one of the ways to stay focused is to not constantly get on a rabbit trail or rabbit hole too soon. And so if you send stuff over to repeater using those hotkeys, then you can kind of stay focused for a little while. Hotkeys is under user options MISC, so we will go back one, click on this, go over here. You will notice again that for the examples today, I'm using the BWAP app and the OWASP Juice Shop. Probably, we'll use the BWAP app more often. But if we go into like proxy and HTTP history and we find something that's interesting, we can just do Control R and you'll notice it'll throw it right over there to repeater. It turns orange for a bit and then it goes away. If we do Control Shift R, then it'll flip us right over to repeater and just get you there quicker. And then you may have multiple open tabs. So if you look again on history and we find stuff that's interesting, just Control R, send it to repeater, go down here to this next one. Who am I? We'll find this one, Control R, and you'll notice that repeater will turn orange for a bit, but in each of those tabs are the previous ones that we sent over. And I think we mentioned last time, Brian, but I'm not sure that you can then, as you go through there, name these tabs. So you can call this rest test.
Oh,
and then
was
when
that
you
just
come
right click
back,
or double click?
you actually, there's no visual indication in Burp at all, but you kind of just double click in the tab.
Okay.
So you can name them. I find that especially helpful when you have a bunch of them and you want to come back to them later and you're trying to remember which one you were working on. So again, that's the Control R for send to repeater. You can customize all of those. So if you want to make your own, you can go in and change what's there. So just Control R. I put repeater and intruder and I kind of sorted that way just to show those two. Those were the only two I wanted to, kind of demo today. But just know that, Control R and then Control Shift R will flip you over to that. Next, we are going to talk about first match and replace. So under proxy and options, there is this match and replace down here. So again, we will flip over. and we will look at proxy and options and scroll down here, match and replace. Now, what you'll notice is that I added a match and replace. So when I'm doing web app pen testing, I always put in a header that essentially lists who I'm doing either a pen test for, so that I've had numerous occasions, Brian. I'm not sure if you've ever seen this, but I've had several occasions where people will come back and say, hey, we saw a cross-site scripting payload and we just wanted to know if that was yours. And it could have been like months later. So they're looking at their logs. They will actually see this header in the log. So again, if you look at your history, you will
Oh.
see here's the original request. Because I said match and replace, here's the auto modified, and you'll see that all of their logs will say X pen tester 7 minsec or whatever you want.
Oh,
So yeah, go
so
ahead.
it's just it's literally is the is the rule for any request send along that
Yep,
header? Is that what that is
exactly.
saying?
Yep.
Oh,
And
okay.
since it's blank, we're not matching it.
Match
But match
nothing.
and replace can be used. So you'll notice when we scroll up here, there's much easier ways to do this now. It's really just for showing how it can work. So you can emulate IE. So, I have like a plugin that I use in my browser to change my user agent string, but there's a lot of options here in match and replace. So you can insert headers, you can change headers. One of the most common things that I use as well is changing things like just removing caching. So you can set the caching directive, these two right here, non-cast pages, because it's really annoying that when you're testing, you'll get a response that basically says that the page was cached and you won't see what it is. It just says nothing changed. If you check these two, then it'll take out all the caching directives, so you get responses from all of the pages, not a cached page. Make sense?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So match and replace, that's pretty cool. I use it for a variety of different things. Again, one of the things that I'm trying to do is show these options that are kind of a little bit deeper under the weeds in Burp, and then kind of to spark a, hey, I wonder if I can do this. When I ran across that, how can I create a custom header? I thought there must be a plugin or something. That's when I started using match and replace more to put in things like custom headers or clear out the um, cache settings or just change the user agent string. So that's that one.
Cool.
Next is response modification. Now, response modification is pretty cool as well. So when I'm testing, at certain points during my test, I will say unhide hidden form fields. There's another option that says prominently unhide form fields, and then enable disabled fields. So you'll see in some sites they will have disabled fields that they're not ready to use, or even based on your security level, they may use JavaScript and just say, hey, let's disable this field because this person doesn't have permissions to use it, which is a pretty poor design, but I have seen it. Remove input field length. So I see one of the ways, like on this field right here, it may say, well, it's only 20 characters. So, we right click on it and we say inspect element. That element may only allow you see size 25 right there, Brian.
Yeah,
So if
yeah.
we edit that HTML, basically what it'll do is change that where it says, I'm just going to remove that from a length requirement so you can enter as much as you want. Most of the time I run across that when I'm trying to input cross-site scripting payloads, and they try and limit it like the name to only 10 characters or something, but your payload's much longer, and you're like, if only I could, get this payload in here, I think it would fire. That's a way to do that. So you can manually do it, but this will just do it for you. I have a
Ah.
picture of the unhide hidden form fields as well. So on the next screen over here, I'm going to show you, I grabbed one this morning. It really makes it prominent, but basically in the search bar up here for this website, it'll make prominent all of the fields that are hidden, so that to me, it's really just prompting you to go look at these things that you may have otherwise missed. So when I'm looking for, is there anything else about this website that I missed, I will go through and turn this feature on, so I can see if there's any hidden form fields and I don't have to go searching for them. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. Okay.
There's
Cool.
also some other options down here. Remove all JavaScript's probably not a great idea. That'd probably break the website in general, but remove objects, convert HTTPS links to HTTP. Again, testing for if you can downgrade an attack, and then remove all secure flags from cookies. So for instance, if you have cross-site scripting, you can remove the secure flags and try and force that so you can grab those cookies that may otherwise be secure. Cool.
Wow.
All
Cool.
right.
Cool.
Next, let's see, we're about 14 minutes in. So request in browser is something that I use every now and again. I'm a very visual person. So one of the things from the history that you can do is essentially like on this who am I, we'll right click and then we'll say request in browser. And there's two options. So if this history is old, you can request it in the original session or in the current session. So basically, one of the things you'll find is if you're testing over time and you log out or your cookies expired, you want to rerun a test, but your cookies already expired, so you want to see what it looks like. You can say, do this same request, but do it in the current session. And essentially what it does is it creates a little link for you, and it forces that request back through Burp, but replaces any of the cookies with the current session cookies. Now, this one was just a JSON who am I that happens in the background. It's a pretty poor example, but it was really more of how do I use that. If I want to see something re-rendered in the browser, but I want to apply the settings from Burp, this will force it back through Burp so you can actually see it rendered.
Ah.
It's very similar to the render option, but it'll actually, play all of the JavaScript and everything else in your browser. So kind of a neat feature. Again, I use it every now and again when I'm like, what is going on in this page? When you see it, a response down here, sometimes there's so much gibberish in there. Let's see if we can find one that was more application config. So like there's a lot of stuff here. And by the way, there's that pretty print option. In this particular JSON response, it's already fairly pretty. But some of the responses, when you unclick that, you see how it just makes a
Oh,
mess
okay.
on the screen there, and you're like, oh, so this basically puts it in the pretty key value pairs like it's, intended. There was a lot of extensions that did this before.
Oh, yeah, that's why it looks familiar.
Yeah, exactly.
Prettifier or Pretty Me
Yeah,
Up or something
Prettify,
like that. Okay.
exactly. Yep. And so they just added in right there. And that original setting that I showed you basically is how to disable it by default. Some people don't like it. The other thing is that they just added is these hidden characters. So essentially the line returns, you can add them in by clicking this little button. It's off by default as well.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Nice.
Alrighty.
Nice, nice.
So remember that was request in browser, a handy feature.
Yeah.
Let's see what else we got. Repeater. So repeater, pretty straightforward. One of the things that we're going to do in repeater is we are going to take this request. We're going to put in dog or monkey or whatever you use. Click search. And we could do the control R, but we want it right here. So now we're going to do control R to send to repeater. Control Shift R, jump over there. And oftentimes, Brian, I don't know, how you use repeater, but to me, I think of repeater as what if situations, as opposed to Intruder, where I want to send lots of payloads. I will use repeater a lot to say, I wonder if something's happening here. Or what does it look like? So we'll send this response and, or send this request, and you see we get a response back, and, it's just a page response. So two features that I want to mention, the little gear icon right here and auto scroll to match when text changes. A lot of people know this, a lot of people don't, but I find that when I'm searching for a particular response and I'm trying to do it quickly, this is very helpful. So in this case, we are going to search for like SQL. And then we are going to, so we have basically clicked auto scroll to match when text changes. So we're going to put a little tick right here because we all know, right, that what's the best way to test for if a parameter is injectable. And it says that there's 5 matches, so it will then jump through all of the areas. But if we had done like SQL syntax, it would have jumped down here. So what do we see from that, Brian?
So was this? Okay, you said, oh, 5 matches means differences in text between the last request you sent and this one? Is that what
That
it is?
we're searching for SQL. So
Yeah.
basically it's highlighted 5 matches that we can jump through, and it will auto jump to the first one. So if we put like SQL syntax in here, and then we jump back up here and send this again, you'll see that it'll jump right down to SQL syntax. And there's only 1 match. So the more
Oh,
unique we make our search request, the better it's essentially going to work, and it's going to jump right to that, because you see this page is relatively long.
yeah, yeah.
The other thing we learned right there is by using repeaters that if we put a tick in, we got a response from SQL Server, because it's giving us a MySQL
Oh,
Server
yeah.
version. Oh, so we know that this page is probably injectable. So this, again, is how I use repeater often, is a what if. Like, is there something about this parameter that I want to test or see what happens, or take this out, as opposed to Intruder, which is going to send a bunch of payloads. This is more manual testing where I'm just poking around to see what's going on. So then we're going to
Sure.
talk about, the next thing we're going to talk about is Intruder. Um, and so there are Intruder attack types. So I think everybody's probably, maybe has used Intruder before, but now we're going to kind of peel back the layers a little bit and look at the different attack types. I think most of the time when I see like hack the box users or something else, they're just going right for the default sniper,
Yeah.
because that is the default. So we're going to talk through each of them. And so the first one is Sniper. Sniper replaces one position at a time. It uses one payload set. So this picture over here, which is courtesy of this guy, I actually reached out to him and said, hey, your pictures are super awesome. Can I use them? And he's like, absolutely.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so you'll notice that, even though we may select multiple positions, it's really just going to send Sniper one position payload at a time. And it's going to use the original values for all positions, um, except the one that we're testing. Does that make sense, Brian? Am I kind of making sense there? It's literally going to take a single payload set and loop through each position at a time. So you'll notice that the second position break, it's going to put in the second position, and so on and so forth as it goes down through.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Gotcha.
It does, and the math is basically positions times payload. So if you've set, a whole bunch of payloads, this is for individual testing of input parameters. So one at a time. It'll loop through them one at a time.
Okay.
It's a default most often used for cross-site scripting and SQL injection, because you'll want to loop through the parameters, okay? The next one then is battering ram. Uses one payload set regardless of the number of positions. So you think of it in terms of, I get why they call it battering ram, because essentially what we're doing is just stuffing whatever payload set we have in every single position. So you see down here, we've marked
Oh, yeah.
1, 2, 3, and hello, and it's just going to stuff 4, 5, 6 in every single one. So it does as many requests as there are payloads in the payload set. So if you have 25, it's going to do 25 requests only, because it will stuff them in all of the positions at once. It's the quickest way to see if any position is injectable, because remember, on the Sniper, basically it's going to go through one at a time and test them, so it will take a little bit longer. If we actually use battering ram, it literally is just throwing everything at it quickly. What's hard to tell then from the results is, where was that injection? You kind of have to look at it a little closer to see where the injection may have happened. The next one is Pitchfork. So Pitchfork is, to me, kind of like a key value pair. And so you have, if your first payload set is 4, 5, 6, you'll notice that we'll replace 4, 5, 6, and then the second payload set will be in the second response. So it's kind of going to go in order down the list and apply them, and then switch to the second payload set. So you see, Break and Richard are put in the
Oh,
second.
okay.
So it's kind of splitting. That's hence the name payload. So the first payload set always goes in the first position as it iterates down through the list. So they're always going to essentially be A/B testing all the way down. And then the last one is Cluster Bomb. So it makes a combination with all payload sets, does the payload position request. First payload set goes into the first position. I see this as best for username password brute forcing. With passwords where the username and password lists are separate, and we want to just test them across all of the responses. So let's just click over here. We're going to click on the login page. So what we're going to do is log out. And then we're going to capture this. So let's go ahead and click on the old proxy and intercept just for giggles. We're going to turn intercept on, and we're going to do foo, if we can type, and then bar. And we're going to say login.
And I forgot to tell people too, as you're doing this, if you've got questions about what you're seeing, please punch them into the Q&A box there on Zoom, and I'll be babysitting that as we go here.
Actually, you know what? I am going to do Juice Shop instead. I'll show you why. Just 1 second.
Good old Juice Shop.
Good old Juice Shop.
I mean, I'm a little upset that you don't have the 7MS theme applied to the Juice Shop, but I'll let it slide this time and this time only.
You'd even be madder if I did like the Plex track. They don't have a theme. I'm just kidding. I've been busting Brian's chops because he didn't send me a shirt yet. So
I know. Comes up here wearing a Plex track shirt.
Time,
I'm like, all right, we'll get polos, jeepers. At least I have an excuse, right? It's like, listen, okay, my house was a barbecue. I lost all the good stuff.
Yeah. Okay, that's not the one we want. This one looks like the one we want. So we're going to send that over to Intruder, and I didn't use my shortcut, but that's okay. Okay, so first thing is the positions. We're just going to clear everything. We're going to select the positions we want. We're going to add this position. Let's do it nice and clean in there. We're going to click add. Okay. Now, we're going to say cluster bomb on this one. Select our payload type, and then we're going to select on the payload. So on the first list, we'll say Bill, Bob.
Okay, so you're just making your own.
Yeah. So in this case, we're going to make it quick. So mom, because your mom's listening. One thing to point out here is that we want to uncheck this URL encode because we're actually sending accounts, and then on payload processing, we're going to add a nifty little rule. We're going to say add a suffix. So here's the scenario. You have a list of users that you've discovered, but you know their username pattern is like this. So we're going to say add on to this a suffix at testco.com. We're going to say OK, and the reason we want to uncheck this is because it's going to URL encode our at, and we don't want to do that because we know it's a proper username and password. Okay, then list 2 is going to be our passwords. What is the other password? 1, 2, 3, 4. And then this good old password here, which I use on everything. We want to uncheck this, otherwise it'll, if we have any special characters in our password, it's going to URL encode them as well. And then we'll see if we missed anything. Just for giggles, let's make sure we do this. And we will start attack and see if we have, and what do we see right here, Brian?
Lots of, ooh.
So there's a 200. So we know, so what we did there is that we added that, because you remember in payload set 1, we said Bill, and then we added, so let's go back there, payload set 1, we added that payload processing. Can be used for a lot of different things. There's a lot of options. So that was kind of another tip I wanted to add in there about doing those payload processing. And then of course on the results, we did get a 200. There's other cool things that you can do in here, like grep extract. So I wanted to mention that as well. So if we wanted to add a grep extract rule for this area, basically in the body, we'll say okay, and then we go back to our results, we will have extracted that portion of the body here. So you'll see in this case, we're getting a JOT token back. So if we wanted to extract that JOT token to use it somewhere else, we can go up here and say save, and then save the responses or the columns and export that out. You can add additional columns to it in case you want to use it in future testing.
Yeah. Oh, cool.
Cool. So we're done with that one there.
Man, that's neat. See, I would have, and I just feel like I'm just in student mode here. Hope you don't mind me clacking away.
Not at all. No, please.
I realize I'm not. I just said, hey, it'll be recorded, but for me, it's like write it down as
solidify it by writing it down. Yeah.
Yes, and I definitely in the past, just to be totally honest, have for sure set up a username set like you did, and then just gone into like Excel or some Linux command line ninja to add, at company.com. And I really just need to, in Burp in general, but I think in life in general, or pen testing life in general, I need to just slow down and go, wait, is there functionality in here that would just do this for me before I go, well, I can keep this moving forward, but it may take me, 20 minutes when it could take me 2 seconds. So.
For sure. Yep. And I think, that's Burp in general to me. There's just so much to it. There's so many different options that I've kind of been in the mindset of there's got to be an easier way. And I'm wasting time by not figuring out that easier way. And that's when you come across stuff like that. So that's why I try and, just every day I try and what's something in Burp. Another example from me would be like intercepting JOT tokens, and we'll talk about that maybe in the macro section, but just trying to be more efficient with my testing, because if I can get some of these, quick, easy wins, then I have more time for just under, the covers testing more deep in the app, as opposed to just muddling my way through, brute forcing accounts. So. Okay, so that's Cluster Bomb. A couple of tips there, and we talked about the payload sets. So I wanted to put these screenshots in just in case you couldn't remember. So we did Cluster Bomb, username, password, and don't forget to uncheck these. If you're sending, in Intruder, cross-site scripting, or anything else, you're going to want to go ahead and leave that URL encoding. But I see this almost like accidentally forgetting to turn intercept off. Putting this in and just moving on and saying, oh, there wasn't a admin password set, but it's because we encoded it as we were putting it in the password with an @ symbol. We encoded the @ symbol, and then it replaced it with the URL encoded symbol, and really the password was capital P @, but we encoded the @ sign, and that totally messed up our tests. So.
And is that payload encoding by default checked?
It is by default checked.
Oh, do you feel like that's just? Just wondering. Do you feel like that's something that should be unchecked?
I think 95% of the time you want your payload encoded, so I think it makes sense. Like if I had to check it every time, I would be irritated. It's only in the rare occasions when you're brute forcing passwords that you want that.
Oh, I suppose. Okay, all right, good point.
Cool. So suffix add, there's a lot of options in the payload processing where you can add stuff to it. You can take stuff away. You can, lots of cool options there to be explored. So one of the things that I put in here, just as it relates to Intruder, you notice that when we first went into Intruder by default, it essentially had everything selected. That's because virtually everything is an inject point in a web app. So I threw this in. It's Jason Haddix from Bugcrowd University. He just did a version 4 of his bug hunters methodology. That's really geared at bug hunting, and the approach to bug hunting is really different than pen testing, right? In bug hunting, you are looking to be the first one to find that bug. So it's all about efficiency. So efficiency is good in a normal web app pen test, but you also want as much coverage as possible for the app. So that's why you kind of diverge at that point and say, how is bug hunter methodology different than just web app pen testing? A lot of the same skills, just the approach is completely different. So,
gotcha.
Cool. Okay.
Sorry,
go ahead.
Before you continue,
got a question?
Yes, we do. Our buddy Kenneth asks, hey, Ghost Hacks, do you ever have much success with the add from list for Burp payloads, or do you prefer to load your own?
Really good question. I probably should have covered that. So in Pro, and this is a big difference between Pro, and I said I would try and point this out. In Pro, you have these built-in lists, and these built-in lists, I kind of consider them a starting point. I do not rely upon them. If you want to get, Pro-like features in the Community Edition, you can use Intruder. What's the plugin? There's a plugin, we'll get to it in a bit, that essentially is just like Intruder, but it doesn't have the throttling. So in the Community Edition, you throttle. And that's one of the big differentiators between Pro and Community. So I think the lists are great. One of the things, so we'll just clear these so we can see them. So add from list, one of the ones I always use, by the way, I do the fuzzing with cross-site scripting just to tell me if I get a response, but I don't rely upon this list at all. I go ahead and I have 5 or 6 different Git repos with cross-site scripting payloads, and I just copy them out and paste them in here. You can also load them from a file. I just found that I work on so many different machines at the same time. So I have my Kali machine, I have my Mac machine. I'll have like 4 different burps going, and I just don't want to keep the list updated all the time, so I go grab them. That's an efficiency I could probably get better at, but these lists are a good starting point. The one that I probably use on every single test is the HTTP verbs. So we can go back, for instance, and look at this one. Let's clear these out for now. Let's change this back to Sniper. On every test, I will do HTTP verbs. Click our payloads, clear, make this list verbs. Right there. Okay, and it'll put them in there. And then, doesn't really matter if we encode them, start attack. What that's basically going to do is tell you, payload processing rules, funny Joe. So it'll tell you if
is that part of the methodology too? Just talking to yourself,
always talk to yourself. You
okay.
have to. You don't want to sit there alone. And
yeah,
it'll tell you basically if any of these methods are allowed. So delete, you get an internal 500 error. So all of those for the most part are good. Options get to 204, which is no content. But I always like to test this on all of the tests that I do as well. So there are some of the lists, to answer Ken's question, some of the lists are great. I consider it a starting point only. I'll use the fuzzing list, but yeah, really pro feature. The list can be modified too, but it's kind of a pain to modify them. I think it's up in the options, but yeah. Cool.
Good stuff.
All right, let's talk about macros. Macros can be difficult. We'll see if we can get this one to run again. I left it recorded. So under project options session, you can have different session handling rules. So one of the ones that we're going to look at today, if you run the scanning engine in Pro, you will find that oftentimes servers will log you out. They don't like what you're doing, so they're going to say, oh, I'm just going to log you out. So we can use a macro to automatically log us back in. I see that as one of the 2 probably most popular use cases. So if we look at our next slide, macros are kind of good for multi-step processes. So if we want to do XYZ, like input a form, do another step, and then another step, macros work great at doing that for you. If you need to pull CSRF tokens, so you need to make a request, grab the token so you can replay it, macros work great for that as well. The thing that I tend to use most is for session management and getting logged out. So my next slide is pretty darn busy, but in project options, sessions, I did this slide this way so that you could see all of the options at once when you're watching this later, as opposed to trying to go through all of the steps. So when we post the slides, you'll have all of the options on the screen so you can recreate this. So essentially, we're going to go into project options, sessions, edit, and then we're going to add a macro that is the first thing this rule is going to do is check if the session is valid. So there's multiple ways to check for a valid session. In our case, we're going to look for the header that basically is redirecting you to login.php. Now this won't always work, so you can look for the redirect. So the way to capture this is basically log out and go back to a known page, and you'll see that it redirects you to the login. This will make more sense in a minute, but essentially what we're going to do is say if session is invalid, perform this action again. So we're going to slide over to this next and look at project options session, and you'll see that I've created this right now just to try and make it easier on us, but let's go ahead and edit it, and you'll see those same screens. It's going to check if session is valid, and that is basically one of a multitude of drop downs that are available. So let's edit this one that we have. And basically what this is telling is that wherever we tell Burp, it's going to issue the current request, and then it's going to look for this in the headers for login.php. It's going to look for a literal string. We can use regular expressions. We can say that it's case sensitive, basically to try and weed out false positives. And then the match indicates either an invalid session, or we could change it depending on our use case to a valid session. So then if session is invalid, run a macro, and then we've recorded this macro called login, and I knew we'd be tight on time, so I did it ahead of time. We'll click on edit, and in that edit, basically, we have captured the login for the app. In this case, it's bug, and we'll do a form submit. So basically what we're doing is saying, do a post and log in to the app. Does that make sense, Brian? Did I cover that too fast?
No,
until you
that's cool.
do it, so basically if we can click on this configure item right here, you'll see that basically what we're doing is that we are replacing the parameters with whatever we want. It's captured them and saying, is this what you want? Okay. Add cookies received in response to the cookie jar, and use cookies from the session handling in cookie jar, basically in future requests. So if we expire, we're going to log back in. So in this case, I'm going to show you one other thing that I did is so that was the details. Under the scope, I said use this in proxy because it's really hard to simulate. I didn't want to go through on a scan and basically have it force it to log out and log back in. So in this case, I said use it with proxy. So what we're going to do is we'll go back to BWAP and we'll make sure that it's enabled. Well, let's do it without it first. Live demos. So one of the, let's log in. And we'll select one of them. And you'll notice that it basically goes to portal.php. So we are going to leave that off, and we are going to log out and cross our fingers that it works the way that it's supposed to.
Good luck to you, sir.
Yeah.
You're already more daring than I'll ever be.
So you notice right there, it puts us back to the login. It's basically saying, hey, you're not logged in. So we're going to check this option, and we are going to go back to portal. And you will notice that it ran and logged us into the website. Now, hopefully that made sense. Let's go back here and look at the history. And the first time you see this is the proper login. So we tried to hit portal, and you can see that it basically said, it sent us a post that said, hey, you need to log in to the website first.
Oh, and there it is. I see. So that was going to be my question. That's how you would know it ran, and if there was some issue or it wasn't running, you would just go through the history basically and try to figure out why it didn't fire.
And there is this sessions tracker which will help you. So there's a sessions tracker which you can run to see if it's running correctly. In the so if we edit it here, there is also, so we'll look back at the macro itself. I went the long way because the macros here, because macros don't have to be tied to session handling rules. This is what kind of glues them together. But there's actually a test macro right here. So we can say retest macro. Are you sure? And you saw that, see my session ID updated. So we saw that it got a valid 302 and it was redirecting. So you can also make multiple steps in here as well. So we can add steps to do other functions after the login. So macros, again, are one of those areas that it could be a webinar in and of itself.
Yeah.
So let's see. How are we doing on time? We're getting close. I might pick up the pace just a little bit. So talking too much, Brian. Let's see. Let's do this one. We'll say hack. Let's get back to our slides over here. So that was the macros. Again, in the slides, it kind of goes through each of those options that we talked about. When you talk about things like grabbing jot tokens or other things, it can be a little more complicated, but there's essentially, screen grabbing rules in there where you can grab or essentially grab certain sections and then put them in cookies. There's a lot of options here, a lot of things that can be done with macros, but I use it most often when scanners run, and you'll see so often that scanner will just force you to be logged out. And it's really annoying because you'll start getting errors in the scanner and you'll be like, what's going on? Oh, my session was invalidated. So if you just run that macro, it'll just log you right back in and keep going. Okay, let's talk about some extensions. C02 is an oldie but a goodie. Authorize is relatively new on that front. It's used for authorization testing. And then last time I think I mentioned flow, and what I see more and more is JSON Web Tokens being used. You can see that I run a ton of extensions. So I put all of the ones that I'm running right now. Some of them are pro, some of them are not. But here's all the extensions I use fairly regularly, and I enable and disable them depending on what point I am during my test. So the first one we're going to look at is C02. And I think, Brian, you and I talked about this a while back, but a lot of people don't know that most people I see will just copy this command. But if you click on the config and essentially point to where SQL map is installed, you can launch it right from here. And so we're going to run that real quick. So let's look at this one. We're going to search for a movie, foo. We're going to capture, so we're going to go to proxy history. You see that we're searching right here. So what I'm going to do is right click on this and say send to SQL mapper. So it sends it over here. And then there's a lot of options that we can mess with. I mentioned JWTs, and if there's like a bearer token or something else, any parameters you want to add them right here. And then when you click run, it's going to throw those parameters out to the command line. So one of the things that I always do when I'm testing for SQL injection, and Brian taught me this many years ago, if you put an asterisk in there, it will only test this parameter and it'll ask us. And the thing that we're going to also look at is we want to look at the tables. So you'll see it'll throw in a tables option up there. So I think we got everything we need. Let's just go ahead and click run. And because it's Xterm, it's going to be a tiny little window, but I will see if I can remember how to make it bigger. Let's see, it's control. Yeah. So we'll make it like huge.
And what was that? Just a right click in that window?
Yeah, so if you hold control and right click, because it's on Kali, it fires Xterm. Actually on Mac, it'll just fire whatever your default terminal is. So you can do the normal, control shift plus minus. So basically this is saying, hey, I see this asterisk. Do you want to run it? We'll just say, yes, we do.
Yes.
It'll say, do you want to follow? Yes. And it's going to run. And did we do the right one? Don't you hate it when it fails? So
I do.
It actually says that it found them and that it's vulnerable, but it also said that it was unable to retrieve table names from the database, which I find odd because this worked about 100 times this week. But
yay!
Live demo gods. So let's take out tables, put databases. We'll run it again, and it is.
I am embarrassed that I didn't know how to do that thing you did where you just pointed it to where SQL map lived. I've just been copying and pasting manually, which is fine, but this is better. You're teaching me better ways, quicker ways to do things.
And I think what I did is I'm messing with my login. So then in this case, it worked correctly. And because of those options, and I'll tell you, is that it dumped the database, right? So you can just keep going. And for instance, the tables, the columns, dump the current DB users, right? Just keep setting your options and it'll throw them in there and you can just keep running it. From a detection standpoint also, and because this window is open, I can't change my options, so I'm going to kill it. But also, I usually run, at a higher level and risk as well. If I know the database we're running, you put in that option. So we'll say MySQL. We don't need a version number, but all of these options are available. And if you can't remember them, it's kind of nice to have them available there for you. It really kind of gets you kickstarted in SQL Map. I use this all the time. I test for SQL injection all the time. I don't see SQL injection all that often, but I love it when I do. Just a few weeks ago, I found it on the app, and it was pretty cool.
Yeah,
So
yeah, I know.
That one.
I know I'm disturbed, but yeah, when like that window you showed in the terminal, when you see that the full dump ability, where it's just like, here's everything. Just what do you want? Do you just want to dump? Do you want the whole thing? It makes you feel giddy. I'm not gonna lie.
Exactly. Yep. And it makes it so much easier for testing. The next one we're going to talk about is Autorize. So let's go ahead and log out. And then we are going to click on the Autorize. And I already have it turned on. But I wanted to show you basically from a configuration perspective, what Autorize will do is that if you grab your session and you can say fetch cookies from last request, now you want to do that as a logged out or low priv user. So what we're testing for is, does a lower privileged user have access to site resources that a higher privileged user has access to? So what we're testing is, horizontal authentication bypass or authorization bypass. And I left some of these up here just so we could see them. But essentially what you do is you grabbed a cookie of a low priv user. Now our BWAP app only has one user, one level. So my example is kind of contrived, but it's hard to find vulnerable web apps that have 3 levels of user that you can test with. But essentially you'll want to log in as the lowest privileged user, grab your cookies, so fetch the cookies, and then you can set your enforcement. So basically, what is the website going to tell us as far as you shouldn't have access? So it could be that you're going to get a redirect. So it's going to say 403 login, you're not authorized for this. And you can just go through the app as the highest priv user, touch all of the pages, and it will tell you if it's enforced or not. So in this particular one, because I didn't set a scope, I wanted to show some ITsec games or whatever it is in, I think, Juice Shop somewhere. You can see that as and let's move these over just a bit, authorized status and unauthenticated. So it's going to send a request, and if we look on this tab right here, you have original request, unauthenticated request. So it's going to send a request and strip out all of the cookies. So you see all the cookies are missing. So this will tell you if an unauthenticated user can reach specific pages. If they can, you'll get this bypassed. If they can't, it'll say, oh, it's enforced. So you know that the pages are properly secured for authentication. Does that make sense? I feel like I covered that fast, but if you do authorization testing for pen test, you will love this. So basically, you have 3 tiers of users or 4 tiers. You browse the website like you normally would as the highest privileged user, but you've grabbed a cookie of the lowest privileged user and pasted it here, and it's going to check those. There's a couple more that do this as well. Every pen test you do, you should be doing authorization testing. This makes it super fast. And then you can export this report, and it's pretty awesome.
Oh, that's cool. I've definitely, well, suffice to say, I've been doing it much lower and manual.
It just takes more time, right?
Yes.
More
I gotta
and
look
more
into
time. Let's refresh the juice shop again real quick. How are we doing on time, Brian?
Got about 5 minutes. And there is a question that's come in as well, but we can answer that at the end.
Yeah, go ahead.
Whatever you put.
Just going to show this one last, this
yeah,
JWT real quick. And we should have seen one. So we noticed that when we put this token, all I'm going to say is that it tells you in the comments section that there's a JWT in it. It's pretty cool because you can look at it, and with that extension in place, it will show you the JOT token. Where are you not? Why are you not working extension? Okay, we'll come back to that one. Let's grab the question real quick, and I want to make sure that that was the last slide, and I think it was. Oh, we're going to talk about Collaborator, but we don't have time. So if you've never used Collaborator, I'll just mention real quick that essentially Collaborator allows you to see if you have external interaction, and I showed the example on the screen where it'll essentially set up a server, and PortSwigger hosts this themselves, so Burp Collaborator. You don't have to use their servers, you can set up their own, but this will essentially show if you can essentially induce a server to make an external call, and this is a good way to test if you have, various interactions, service interactions from the test that you're doing. So you'll notice here that when I did this netcat out to this, and this was again just a contrived example on OS command injection, it did a DNS lookup out to this Burp Collaborator and tells me that I can force the server to take action to another server on my behalf. It's just a really quick way to start testing whether there's other parameters that are injectable, and then you can force the server to do things like request a separate JavaScript page or something else like that. Does that make sense?
That does. And this is probably running out of time for this as well, but how do you feel about rolling your own Collaborator server versus having, the Burp Suite folks potentially be seeing, your customer servers calling out to them and, doing DNS lookups and all that stuff?
Yeah, and that's why I mentioned that you can do a custom server, and it's really pretty straightforward to do, and then you can configure some of the options. For instance, the default ports that it listens on, I think I had it on, I have it on this page, yeah. So it's listening for HTTP request, DNS request, and SMTP request on port 25. I think probably as you get further on in your testing, and depending on the sensitivity of the tests, you'll probably want to roll your own. It's relatively easy to do, so I recommend doing that.
Okay.
I don't really think, PortSwigger has anything nefarious going on. It's just how sensitive is the test you're doing, and how secure do you think PortSwigger is? So,
sure, I like it. Okay, I got 2 minutes, but also got two questions. First question from our buddy Kenneth again. Could you run more than one macro at the same time? Like if you're testing a privileged and unprivileged user?
It will run them in order and depending on the set. So I think the answer is yes. So you can run multiple macros. They may be fired by different things. So you could have a bunch of different macros here, and the macro is going to fire based on whatever you tell it to do, if that makes sense. So simple answer, yes. The session handling rules kind of tell it what parameters to follow. So if you see in this one, this is essentially what the macro is going to do. You have to then tell it what is going to cause it to fire. So that's where the session handling rules come in. And you'll see that there's a lot of different rule actions. So use cookies, set a specific cookie, check if session is valid, prompt for in-browser, just run a macro, run a post macro request. So one of the things I would often use a session handling rule to invoke a burp extension. So you could do things like send it to one of the extensions. So if you wanted to copy out, for instance, that JOT token and try and do something with it, you can run a macro that would basically copy that out and send it to one of the extensions. There's lots of options here. Like I said, macros by themselves could probably be a whole webinar.
Very good. And then GP asks, when you do web app, do you follow a list or just go gut feeling? I think he's.
That is a great question. So
Yep.
I follow a list to make sure I cover all of the right things. And I will give props to Tim Tomes. I took his PWAPT class, Practical Web Application Pen Testing, and he provided a list that is super awesome. It's not an open source list, but if you take his class, he has some actual classes coming up where he's going to do them web-based. I'm signing up again. I know people that have taken his classes over and over again because they're so good. But I definitely follow a checklist. It's a modified version of what he had, but it just makes sure that I don't forget to test something. So good question.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Tim. I took his class as well a couple years ago. Best, condensed web app training I think I've ever taken. And yeah, I just got an email from him this morning. I can't remember what he went out on his own, I think, a couple years ago, and I can't remember what the new name is, but he's saying like,
I think
yeah,
it's
I'm doing
practical security.
Practical security, yeah, and he's doing some remote options. Just
I'm for sure signing up. I wish he would do BPAT, but he's doing PWAP, but that's fine.
Yeah, and I know for before I got to see him in person, I would nag him a couple times a year, like, please do remote options. And I think he was not a big fan of that, but it's interesting. Right?
I've talked to him several times, and he's just like, I just don't feel like I can protect my intellectual property if I do that. And I'm like, I totally get it. And I think, the current situation has just kind of forced his hand, and I feel bad, but I think travel right for the foreseeable future is just a thing of the past. So I was so happy to see it from I want it, and I want to take it again. There's just so much. He is just awesome. So enough about him, but
check out his training for sure. All right, well, Joe, thank you so much. I think that's the end of our questions. Thanks for joining us, everybody. This will again be on YouTube in a week or so, and I think that's it. Anything I forgot to mention, Joe? Otherwise, we'll let people go hit their day.
I think that's it.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks again, Joe.
Thank you.
All right. See you guys next time. Bye-bye.